From the battlefield, let's turn to the diplomacy, to a question rather. Will Vladimir Putin come to India for the G20 summit? The summit is next month on September 9th and 10th. So far, there is no confirmation about Putin's attendance. He was asked about it recently, and this was his reply. I don't know yet. I haven't thought about it. We'll have to see. So pretty non-committal. If Putin does come, expect some fireworks. He would be face-to-face with all Western leaders, Joe Biden, Rishi Sunak, Emmanuel Macron, Olaf Scholz, all of them. Not a single Western leader has met Putin after he invaded Ukraine. But at the G20, they may have to share the stage. So I come back to my question, will Putin come? Let's look at India's position first. As host, we have to invite all the G20 members. So Putin does have an official invite from New Delhi. But is that a genuine invite? Or is it just courtesy? Here's what the Indian government said.
I don't have yet any information to share about any physical visits. We would, I think, hope to see President Putin at the G20 Leaders Summit in September. But whether there's a separate visit or not, I don't have anything particular to share.
The Russian president has visited 8 countries since the invasion. Let's pull up the map for you. He's visited all 5 Central Asian countries, or the 5 stans as they're called. He's also visited Iran, Belarus and Armenia. Now what's common about these countries? They're either close partners of Russia, like Belarus, or they absolutely hate the West, like Iran. But India does not fit perfectly in either group. It does have close relations with Russia, but it also shares close relations with the West. So it's a tough call to make. I'm sure a lot of debate is happening behind the scenes. Let's not speculate on that. Instead, let's look at the known variables. We know 3 things for sure. Number 1, this is the second G20 summit after the war broke out. The 2022 meeting was hosted by Indonesia. Putin did not attend that summit. He skipped it. Number 2, he will also skip the BRICS summit in South Africa. Putin will attend this event virtually. There was a big controversy around whether he would be arrested. You see, the ICC has issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin. This is the International Criminal Court, the ICC. South Africa has ratified the ICC charter. So technically, South Africa will have to arrest Putin if he lands on their soil. Their government, though, rejected all of this. Nonetheless, Putin chose to stay away. And finally, number 3, the arrest warrant is not a problem for India. We have not signed the ICC charter, so an arrest is not even a technical possibility. Does that mean Putin will turn up? I'm afraid it's not as simple as that. If it were, the trip would have been announced. Putin is visiting Turkey this month. That trip has already been announced by Moscow. He's also visiting China in the month of October. That too has been confirmed. It's only the New Delhi visit that is yet to be announced. What does that tell you? The issue is not scheduling or dates. The issue is political, and a lot depends on India's concerns. How will the West react if Putin turns up? Will they boycott the summit? Will they allow a joint statement? Will they even allow a civil discussion? And let's face it, a summit with Putin will be vastly different from one without him. Forget issues of the global south, forget hunger, forget climate change. Chances are just one issue will be discussed then, and that issue is Ukraine. And if that happens, India's job becomes even more difficult. Why is that? Because we are hosting the summit. It is India's job to draft a joint statement that all members will agree to. Indonesia managed to do that last year, but India has had less success. In March this year, the G20 foreign ministers met. No joint statement came out. In July, the G20 finance ministers met. Again, no joint statement. If the same happens in September, it would be a major embarrassment. India has pitched itself as a bridging power. So if India can't bridge differences, who can? I'm sure Vladimir Putin knows all of this. If he turns up in New Delhi, the summit would be about one thing, and that's Putin himself. It also makes the chances of a consensus that much harder. So the president has a big choice to make, and so does India. New Delhi had a chance to host Putin last month. The SCO summit was happening. That's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It was supposed to be an in-person meeting, but India said, let's do a virtual one instead. Was this done to avoid hosting Putin? Well, with the SCO, it's hard to say. You also had Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Compared to them, I'm sure Putin was more welcome. Either way, the G20 summit promises to be a tough balancing act for New Delhi, possibly India's biggest yet. Abstaining at United Nations Security Council meetings is one thing. So is buying Russian oil or sending aid to Ukraine. But getting a consensus in New Delhi next month will be that much harder. India will need all the goodwill it has. Moscow is under attack. It may not be raining rockets or missiles, but the city is firmly on Ukraine's radar. Several drones flew into Moscow's airspace on Tuesday. All of them were shot down. One of these objects crashed into an office building. It's the same one which was struck on Sunday as well. So that's 3 days and 2 attacks. What exactly is Ukraine playing at? And how will Russia respond? Well, Ukraine's neighbors are bracing for a spillover, especially Poland and Lithuania. Both are NATO members. They're now thinking about shutting their borders with Belarus. Why Belarus? Because that's where the Wagner fighters are based. Lithuania and Belarus share a 670-kilometer long border. Poland and Belarus around 400 kilometers. Both these borders are fenced, but occasionally migrants and refugees do turn up. That's what both Poland and Lithuania are scared of, that Wagner fighters will pose as refugees to enter their countries.
Most likely they will be disguised as the Belarusian border guard and help illegal migrants get to the Polish territory and destabilize Poland. Presumably they will also try to infiltrate Poland, pretending to be illegal migrants, and they will try to enter Poland, and this poses additional threats.
Will Putin risk that? Well, technically, he won't be involved. Wagner fighters recently staged a mutiny against Vladimir Putin. Western governments declared it a big defeat for him. US President Joe Biden said Putin was weakened. So if Wagner attacks Poland or Lithuania, can the West still call it a Russian attack? Because on paper, Wagner is not Russia. They're anti-Putin, remember? This is what Lithuania and Poland are scared of, that Putin will wage a proxy war against them. He can attack NATO territory, yet deny any official involvement. We've heard these theories before. Most of them have amounted to nothing. So we'll have to wait and see how this one pans out. In the meantime, let's look at the front lines. Russia's army chief visited a command center in the Zaporizhia region. It's a focal point of Ukraine's counteroffensive. Some of the fiercest fights are happening here. Now, the Russian army chief isn't exactly a popular man right now. The Wagner chief had some colorful things to say about him. So did most of Russia's ultra-nationalist bloggers. They blame the general for Russia's slow progress. This visit is supposed to calm the nerves. Maybe the people of Moscow need it too. Their city was supposed to be safe from the war, but that has changed in the last few weeks. On Sunday and Tuesday, Moscow's business districts were under attack. The same high-rise was hit twice. Now imagine you're an ordinary office goer in the city. Would you be worried? Looking at these pictures, I guess you would be. And that's what Ukraine is counting on. The fear factor to build pressure on Russian citizens. The Kremlin has a different take, though. They say Ukraine's counteroffensive has failed. So this is desperation. Listen to this.
Amid the failure of the so-called counter-offensive, the Kyiv regime, backed by its Western sponsors, has focused on carrying out terrorist attacks on civilian infrastructure.
Now, don't think this is one-way traffic. Most of Ukraine's drones are being shot down, but the Russian ones are hitting bullseye, and this is the result. On Monday, Russia struck civilian targets in Zelensky's hometown. At least 4 people were killed. One of them was a 10-year-old girl. Another drone strike hit the city of Kharkiv. It is the second biggest city in Ukraine. 2 floors of a college dormitory were destroyed. Now, these are all civilian targets. The high-rise in Moscow, the apartments in Zelensky's hometown, the dormitory in Kharkiv, these are not legitimate military targets. Why then are they being bombed? Because both sides are more desperate. And Russia is clearly doing more of the damage. Just look at these numbers. Around 150,000 residential buildings attacked, 150,000, 150 bridges, 900 cultural centers, and 3,000 shops and malls. That's Russia's track record in the last 500 days. But when Ukraine hits Moscow, they call it a terrorist attack. A bit rich, I would say. But the larger point is this: neither side should be striking civilian targets. If you're desperate, sue for peace. Don't kill civilians. Which brings us to the talks in Saudi Arabia. The kingdom is planning a peace summit later this month. Ukraine is attending, but not Russia. The United States has confirmed its participation. A dozen others, including India, will also be attending. But is there appetite for peace? Putin says he's always open to talks.
We can't stop the fire when they attack us. When I say this, people start thinking, start the peace talks. We never rejected them. You know, I'm always saying we never rejected the peace talks.
Let's face it, these are not genuine statements. Putin is not serious about a peace deal. Neither is Zelensky serious about concessions, which is why this war is dragging on endlessly. When the fighting broke out, we used to track casualties every day, see how many people were killed, how many missiles were used. But 500 days on, no one is keeping track, it seems. The violence has been largely considered normal and inevitable. Unless that changes, there won't be peace. And now let's tell you about Myanmar, where the military seems to be losing ground. The Myanmar junta captured power in a coup in the year 2021. They pledged to hold elections by this year, but it looks like that's not happening anytime soon. The junta has extended the state of emergency. They say violence makes it impossible to hold elections. A significant portion of Myanmar is not under their control. There is rampant fighting, and an election at a time like this could mean fresh tensions, that's what they say. Meanwhile, Aung San Suu Kyi has been pardoned. She will now be moved to house arrest. So is the junta using Suu Kyi's pardon to distract from its own troubles? Is Myanmar's military losing the plot? Our next report brings you the full story.
Myanmar gained independence in 1958. But its post-independence history has never really been stable. There was unrest, conflicts, and an army that ruled for over 5 decades. The 2010s saw glimpses of democracy and peace. But then came the coup of 2021. Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy won the elections. They were about to take power. The NLD won nearly 80% of the seats, so a landslide victory for Suu Kyi. The army-backed proxy party won only 7% of the seats, so the military was alarmed. They feared that the party would change the constitution, basically weaken the military's political power, and make it answerable to elected governments. So the junta intervened. The coup plunged the Southeast Asian nation into chaos. There was widespread violence, arrests, killings, as the junta launched a bloody crackdown on dissent. The coup was bloody, but the junta made one promise. They said they would hold elections by August 2023. Is that happening anytime soon? By the looks of it, no. The junta have extended Myanmar's state of emergency. They say it's because of the ongoing violence. On the other hand, they have issued a partial pardon for Aung San Suu Kyi. The 78-year-old faces 19 cases. Only 5 have been pardoned. So, a partial pardon. She's also being moved to house arrest. So basically, the junta has postponed elections, but they have also pardoned Aung San Suu Kyi. What explains this seemingly contradictory move? For many, it's just hogwash, a mere distraction from the junta's real troubles. The army may have captured power in 2021, but much of Myanmar is still out of their control. There is rising inflation, constant fighting, and in some areas, the resistance forces are reigning supreme. If an election happens anytime soon, the junta have no way to make sure it goes in their favor. So a delay is their only answer. Plus, there is the stumbling economy. Ever since the coup, it has been in a tailspin. There is hyperinflation, and a lack of investments. As for the international community, many had pinned their hopes on the elections. That includes the ASEAN, which is a grouping of Southeast Asian nations. They looked at it as a pathway to peace. But with elections delayed, and with the junta doing just about anything to consolidate their power, it looks like the conflict will drag on. So stability remains a distant dream for Myanmar, at least for now.
And now let's talk about West Asia. These days, Joe Biden is paying close attention to the region. He has less than a year left in office. Biden desperately wants a foreign policy win, and he could be placing his bets on West Asia, specifically Israel and Saudi Arabia. Reports say the US is trying to broker a deal. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has visited Riyadh twice in 3 months. And recently, the chief of Mossad was in Washington. Mossad, as you would know, is Israel's spy agency. Officially, there is no confirmation, but it appears that some back-channel talks are underway. And what is on the table? Normalization of ties. Israel and Saudi Arabia do not have a diplomatic relationship. I'm sure you know that. For the longest time, Riyadh has supported the Palestinian cause, so there was never a question of having a relationship with Israel. But in recent years, things have shifted. It began with Donald Trump, when Donald Trump was president, and Iran emerged as enemy number one, both for Israel and for Saudi Arabia. And this brought them closer. They both want to contain Tehran, and this common enemy created openings for a relationship. Some Arab countries established ties with Israel. They signed what came to be called the Abraham Accords, and this could not have been done without Saudi Arabia's blessings. Then Riyadh allowed Israeli flights to cross Saudi airspace. So things were all going in the right direction, but Saudi Arabia has not yet taken the plunge. It has still not signed the Abraham Accords. Is that set to change? Well, there is a lot of buzz, a lot of diplomatic activity. American officials talking to the Saudis and Israelis. Reports say Riyadh has also made some demands. It wants some concessions for Palestinians. The Saudis have a wish list for America too. There are two major demands, basically. Riyadh wants American support for a civil nuclear program and a new security pact with Washington, D.C. The specifics of this agreement are yet to be spelled out, the specifics of these demands. But the nuclear program has been a long-standing demand of the Saudis. The kingdom wants to enrich its own uranium. Of course, Israel and the US have opposed this idea. They fear it will trigger a nuclear arms race. The opposition stems from mistrust. Israel fears the Saudis could overstep the mandate and a civilian program may open the doors for military use. This is the same old logic that is used to deter every country that wants nuclear power. But from Riyadh's perspective, this is non-negotiable. The nuclear deal is apparently a prerequisite for normalization. So this is where things stand. The question is, will Israel make these concessions on Palestine and on the nuclear deal? And will the US sign off on this? Like I said, they're still talking. But if Antony Blinken is to be believed, the Israelis and the Saudis are very keen on a deal. The US Secretary of State spoke about this in the month of June. He said, and I'm quoting, "It is incredibly challenging, hard, not something that can happen overnight, but it's also a real prospect and one that we're working on because both the Saudis and Israelis are looking for us to play a particular role in that effort. We are very much engaged in it." Blinken had visited the region in the month of June. He supported normalization. He said the US will not abandon the issue of Palestine at the same time.
Integration and normalization efforts are not a substitute for progress between Israelis and Palestinians, nor should they come at its expense. Israel's deepened relationships with its partners can and should advance the well-being of the Palestinian people and the prospects for a two-state solution.
So that's the American position. There can be normalization of ties, but not at the cost of Palestinians. It's a bit of a hard sell, but that's what they're going with. And Washington wants this deal as much as the Israelis and the Saudis. Not just for Biden's diplomatic win, which he very much wants, but also because this is their way of keeping Saudi Arabia close. Biden wanted to turn Riyadh into a pariah. He failed. He then tried to woo MBS, failed again. Now he's playing the Israel card. In the meantime, the Saudis have made their own moves. They refused to abandon Russia. They refused to increase oil output. And they went ahead and signed a peace deal with Iran. What's worse, it was brokered by China. So the US has a lot of ground to cover. They're eager to mend ties with Saudi Arabia, and normalization with Israel will help. But the biggest challenge right now is Israel itself. It's seen 7 months of protest and counting, and a looming civil war. They need to normalize this situation first before they can normalize ties with Riyadh. And now look at what's going on in Israel's parliament. No, we won't focus on the judicial overhaul today. Instead, there's another problematic bill which has passed. It's been called a sexual terrorism law. This new bill says crimes like sexual harassment or rape should consider the motivation of the attacker. If the attacker is driven by terrorist, nationalist, or racist motivations, the crime will attract close to the maximum sentence. The maximum sentence itself will be doubled in some of these cases, and so will the compensation awarded to the victims. Now, on the face of it, it looks like Israel is cracking down on sexual violence, but critics say this law is not going to target every offender equally. It has specifically been made to go after Palestinians. Here's a report.
Israel's parliament, the Knesset, just passed a bill to get tougher on sexual violence. It was a bipartisan effort. The ruling right-wing coalition and even opposition parties came together to pass this. It's being called a sexual terrorism law, and some of its provisions are contentious. The law doubles compensation fines for sexual harassment. Penalties for sexual assault convictions can be doubled from the current maximum sentencing limit. Government officials must report the number of sexual terrorism cases to Parliament, and the police have to follow up on investigations. If this was all, then Israel would have been commended on taking a hard stance against sexual violence. But that isn't the case, because these tough new measures come with a disclaimer. They are only applicable in cases where the offender had terrorist, nationalist, or racist motivations. Look at the words again: terrorist, nationalist, or racist. In Israel, who do you think can be considered a terrorist, or a nationalist, or racist? Do you think these terms commonly apply to Jewish people, or are they exclusively used to describe Palestinians? That's the criticism of these new laws. They only target crimes by certain groups. They cannot be applied to everyone in Israel. Even when the law was being proposed, there was no effort to hide this. The parliamentarian who introduced it said it would provide for the proper and correct treatment to female Jewish victims. That statement is incorrect, because the new law does not protect Jewish women better from crimes by Jewish men, since Jewish men cannot be proved to have a terrorist, nationalist, or racist motivation while committing an offense. So how is that proper and correct treatment to female Jewish victims? Because the law does not treat the abusers equally. It just punishes Palestinian perpetrators more. But why? Aren't all cases of sexual assault and harassment heinous? Don't all perpetrators deserve the harshest punishments? Then why does this new Israeli law let Jewish Israelis get away with lighter punishment? Because their intention wasn't racist? You cannot have crimes being committed or ranked on the basis of who commits them. The Association of Rape Crisis Centers in Israel has come out against this law. It's a body that provides support for sexual assault victims. It says it has no data of rape being used as a form of terror. And it says the new law is dangerous for creating a form of rating system for sexual assaults. Sexual assault is sexual assault, irrespective of the perpetrator's race or intention. Aida Tuma Sliman is a member of Israel's parliament who voted against the law. She summed it up in a simple tweet: "Do not punish according to hierarchies and classifications. Rape is rape and harassment is harassment. Don't promote racism on the backs of victims." A law that only applies to certain people in a country is a racist law. Critics have accused Israel of institutionalizing racism in the past. Israel has also been called an apartheid state by South Africa, a country who'd know a thing or two about it. Israel vehemently denies the charge. But laws like this new sexual terrorism bill certainly do not help its case.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story, starting with the Philippines. A bride walked down a flooded aisle. Quite literally, the trail of her white wedding gown got completely soaked in water. This is because Typhoon Doksuri has triggered floods in the Philippines. But it did not deter this couple from getting married. In the United States, an audience member splashed her drink at rapper Cardi B. But she wasn't having any of it. The rapper did not hold back and gave it back to her. And a rare white tiger cub was rescued from a private owner in the Czech Republic. It has found a new home in Germany. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1914, Germany declared war on Russia. Germany was part of the Central Powers, while Russia was part of the Allied Powers. After the invasion of Serbia, in fact, Russia began to mobilize its army on the border of Austria and Hungary. Germany asked Russia to demobilize. When there was no response from the other end, Germany declared a full-blown war. We're leaving you with that. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.